Hello, I'm here with a panel of writers who want to share how to work with an editor. So say hello to Kristin, Michael, Nicole, Sarah, and Yuchi. Why don't you introduce yourselves and tell us about your connection with working with editors? Let's start with Yuchi.
Hi everyone, so I'm Yuchi and I do narrative nonfiction as well as dabble in YA, and I'm represented by Cristina Perez at Zeno Literary Agency. And so while I haven't had experience working with an editor at a publishing house yet, last year I was selected for the Rev Pit contest, and so that's like a mentorship program where winners get paired with developmental editors. And so we spent about 3 months revising my young adult fiction book. So that was a really rewarding experience, and I learned a lot. So hopefully I can share some of those insights from that experience here.
Sarah?
I am a science fiction fantasy author. My debut novel came out in 2019 from the Parliament House, and I went through editing with them. They are a small press. And we went through both developmental and line edits and galleys and all that. I've also had some short fiction published in anthologies, so I've worked with editors in that way as well.
Nicole?
Hi, I am also a writer. I do mostly fiction. Right now, I'm doing my first nonfiction book, which is coming out in August, which is really exciting. And mostly short stories before this that are more satirical. But my whole process as a writer, I've really, really grown with the work I've done with editors. So that's why I wanted to be a part of this panel. I think that I wouldn't be the author I am today if it hadn't been for those editors that started working with me in the magazine and now as an actual book author. So that's why I'm here today.
Thank you. Michael?
I'm science fiction fantasy. I've published 17 books through both Big Five, small press, and self-publishing. I worked with editors from the Big Five. I've also hired my own editors for self-publishing works. And I've worked with several editors and trimmed those down to the ones I prefer to use the most.
And Kristin?
Okay, so I'm Kristin, and I am the editor. I founded my business, Kristin Corrects, in 2012. So my business is 9 years old in September. Love it. I edit mostly fiction, although these days I'm swinging more towards sci-fi and fantasy. And to date, I have edited over 400 books. Several of which have gone on to win awards and become Amazon bestsellers in their respective genres.
All right, great. Well, I've known several new writers who thought editing was just about grammar and punctuation corrections, like the red marks we all got on our grade school papers, right? But there are several different types of edits. Kristin, would you share those and explain when a writer would need each?
Yeah. So there are several different types of edits, usually can be categorized into 3 different classifications. So first you have developmental editing. Sometimes goes by different names, but developmental editing in a nutshell is big picture issues, looking at the big picture of your book. Things like plot development, character development, writing tone and style, pacing, world building, all those very important things that make your novel work. After that, there's line editing and copy editing, also known as proofreading sometimes. And those are paragraph and sentence level edits. Those are things like sentence structure, the readability of the book, the logic and clarity of scenes, grammar, spelling, word choice, punctuation. There's a lot. And it's important to note that many editors use many different terminologies and definitions. So when you're working with an editor, it's important to double check with them to be clear on what they're going to do to your manuscript in which services you hired them for.
Yuchi?
So I guess I can just kind of go over the process that I had done with RevPit, but first I received like an edit letter. So it was like several pages, and kind of like what Kristin was saying, my editor had outlined, you know, some structural feedback that she thought could use improvement, and big picture, high level stuff. So after that, I applied those changes, and we did a couple of passes. So I think we might have done like 2 or 3 passes total, where she read my manuscript again, like the revised version. And then if there were areas that still needed to be worked on, she would point them out. And we had this back and forth. And then again, as Kristin mentioned, the last part was the line edits. So.
Sarah?
So for me, the developmental edits are crucial. It just really helps bring out what I'm trying to do, what the story is in my head. With my ADHD, sometimes I have little plot bunnies that get away from me, and a good developmental editor is great at finding those, hunting those guys down. I mean, as far as when a writer would need each level, I would think if you're trying to shop your manuscript out to an agent or something like that, you'd be looking more at that high level developmental, because when you get down into those line edits, you're going to have 2 different editors are going to tell you different things. I mean, on all of them, but you're going to end up going through that with your publisher, hopefully. And they're going to have their own styles that they want to apply to it and everything else. So yeah, I guess that kind of, sorry, I don't end questions very well.
It's okay. Nicole?
Yeah, I do agree with Sarah. I think that the part where you get a developmental editor is so crucial, because it can really shape what your book is going to be. And my own experience with this type of editors has been great. And in my case, I started this book journey with a completely different idea. And it was through talking with them that I actually shaped what I wanted to do. So if someone really wanted to like get something out there, but might be starting out in the process of being an author, a great idea would be to get that type of editing right off the bat and just start your process, even if you're thinking of going with normal publishing or if you're going with self-publishing. It will really help you get someone who has seen hundreds of books and can tell you you're lacking here or there. Especially with me, I have aphantasia, so sometimes it's really, I mean, I don't visualize at all. So it's really good to have someone reading my book that doesn't have that and tell me, hey, I can't really see what you're trying to tell me. Can you be more descriptive about this and that? And it really helps you grow as a writer and have a reader in your mind. Another one that's really important, I would say, it's the acquisition editor, and that would be the one that would actually cold read your manuscript and tell you if it connects to whatever the publishing agency is looking for. And those ones can really tell you how to get your book into a more sellable outcome, because they do have the experience with their own publishing agency and they would know what sells and what doesn't. So for me, those 2 really help in the process. And after those, the copy editor obviously is really important, but I think books wouldn't get to where they are and wouldn't sell as well without those 2 that we just mentioned.
Michael?
Yeah, so when I first had my book published, I started off with a small press, and then I resold the books to a large Orbit Hachette, it's the second largest publisher. And when they did edits for that, they had a structural editor come back and they had a whole list of changes they wanted to have done. And I said, basically to my agent, I said, how much do I actually have to make these changes? And they said, well, they said that it's just suggestions. And I said, oh, does that mean suggestions as in I do it or the deal's off? And they said, no, it's literally just suggestions. I went, oh, good. Because out of these 70, I'm going to make 3. And the reason for that was because I'd already published the books. They had already sold 70,000 copies. And I had heard back feedback from reviews and criticisms on Amazon and various other places. So I knew what worked and what didn't. So based on that, what I've discovered is that for the most part, for me, and this is not indicative of all writers, but for me, structural editing is not something that I would rely on editors for. It doesn't mean that I don't need people to read my stuff and give me feedback, but that's something I do with alpha readers and sometimes beta readers, because in my opinion, any reader can give you good structural editing, because they won't be able to tell you how to fix it. But then again, neither can an editor. Usually they'll say, I don't know, I didn't understand this, or I was getting lost in this part. And then you as a writer have to figure out why. And sometimes you can ask them and they'll try to tell you, and they work really hard to explain it. They don't really come down, and you'll say, oh, you want that changed. Oh, but that's not where that change should be done. It should be over here. And retroactively, and they go, oh yes, that makes much more sense. But it's something that I've developed as a writer, so I don't have to do that so much. But yes, line editing is absolutely fantastic. I had that done at Orbit initially. And those people are utterly amazing. They make you look so much smarter and so much more professional, because they will take a sentence that you wrote and you thought was really good, but they're like, no, actually, see, we moved this clause in front of that clause and take out those extra words, and it's a lot stronger. And you go, okay, that's embarrassing. But that's what they do, and that's why I tend to love them. They also do consistency, which is they will make sure that you spell the name of the same person the same way every single time. That, you know, if you have a bunch of people ride up to a tavern on horses, and then the next scene they leave, and like, what happened to the horses, and things like that. You're just like, they're very small things. Structural editors don't pick it up, but copy editors will be sitting there doing that. And probably the best editor you'll ever have is an audiobook reader, because they read or a translator. Because I had a book, it was all done. It was published through 3 different publishers. It wasn't until it was being translated into French when the guy says, do you know that in chapter 5, you have a person leave the room? And then 3 pages later, that person leaves the room again? I'm like, there's no way. There is no way that's possible. But the translator, literally doing every line, can find that. But yeah, so, and of course, proofreading, just to make sure that all the changes you made in line didn't screw something else up, because every time you touch the book, there's a potentiality for breaking it.
Yep. That's right. That's great. And great. Sarah, what do you think? Should someone aiming for traditional publishing invest in hiring an editor?
No. I mean, I'm not gonna, the answer is not gonna be the same for every writer, of course, but I think that for me personally, my trusted group of critique partners has done so much for me on that front. And I think that publishing already has so many barriers to entry for so many people. And I don't feel like the financial burden of hiring an editor for a book that may or may not ever make it, and in all likelihood, if it's your first, probably won't make it to the publication stage. I can't in good conscience encourage somebody to do that. That said, I think that the book should be in as beautiful condition as you can make it, and getting that group of trusted readers, people you really respect and know are going to find your when your person left the room and then left again for you, is huge. I would be lost without my critique partners. And I don't mean to like disparage editors by saying that. I have a great appreciation for editors, but not at that stage, no.
Nicole?
I think that it's a great point that Sarah brings, especially because, like she said, it's a financial burden. Getting a book there, getting an editor, it's expensive many times. So I have to say that I do see the value with having someone really tweak your first manuscript, especially if you're starting out and you might have doubts about what you really are as a writer or what you want to be. Those people can really get you like your thoughts in the right direction. So it's almost like a coach, right? We have coaches for sports. Why wouldn't we have it for writing? But like she said, it's definitely expensive. And when you go through traditional publishing, you will have editors down the line, you will have acquisition editors and so many people looking at your book. So I would just say if you feel you need that a person who's there with you, giving you that support of actually getting that manuscript done, you have that also that person you are owning something too. So you have to give them something, and you have that sort of contract with them to say that you actually have to get this done. It can actually give you a lot of motivation to get to the place of getting that first manuscript to a publishing agency. So I would see it like that. It definitely is a financial burden, but especially when you're starting out and you will be facing a lot of rejection letters and all of this process. Sometimes when you have someone else looking at your work and actually giving you feedback, you can get a much better product out of the door, and you can use it also as part of your sales pitch. I had someone see this who is a professional and they did some editing and they think it's good. So I definitely use alpha and beta readers and they give me a lot of great feedback. But especially for someone starting out, I think there's a great thing of having a team with you, and that includes an editor for sure.
Michael?
I think that if you're if you're first starting out, you probably shouldn't invest in a structural editor because they're very pricey. They're the type of people that are hired and maintained at a major publisher. So that's going to be way too out of your price to do that. You can get the same thing done by, like you said, having beta readers give you feedback. They'll generally give you kind of the same degree. They might not be able to give you as specific ways of solving the problem, but they will certainly let you know that there's a problem. But on the other hand, if you tend to be something of a sloppy writer and you're concerned about your spelling, your grammar, your structure of exactly how you put paragraphs in, how you use punctuation. If these are things that you're not completely confident with, then yeah, you want to have that just so that when you present it to a publisher, they don't reject it out of hand. If I had one person who was the very first person who was purchasing one of my books just at a convention, they picked up my book and they read it and they went, "Oh, I'll buy this." And I said, "What was it? Was it the clever prose? Was it the witty? Was it, the interesting opening and the hook?" And she said, "No." Because I read the whole first page. There wasn't a single misspelled word.
Wow.
So
That's
that'll give you an impression of sometimes when editors or acquisition editors are looking at it, or agents are looking at your book, they're looking for a reason to not accept it. They're looking because if you don't submit it in the right margin, the right font, these are things that they get so many of them. At least they used to. I don't know if they're still doing it that way, but they used to get so many, they would just look for reasons to get rid of them. And if you have a lot of spelling errors or grammatical errors, they may just reject it out of hand. So you want to make it look clean. You want to make it look professional. But beyond that, I wouldn't spend any large amounts of money for structural or anything of that nature, because you can get that from other people.
Kristin?
Yeah, I would agree with Michael and Sarah. Sarah said that the book should be in the best shape possible, and Michael kind of built on that. And so I'm biased because I am an editor, but yeah, I do think that you should, at the very least, self-edit your work. Obviously, if it's possible for you, you should hire an editor, just because they're able to get your book to that best shape possible that Sarah was talking about. And as Michael was talking about, the market is so saturated that presenting your book as more polished helps your chances of securing that agent or that publisher. Honestly, in a market this saturated, every little bit helps. So even if you're not hiring an independent editor to do that entire structural edits, hiring someone or at least having someone, whether it's an editor or not, preferably yes, but even if you just have someone who hasn't read your book before, go through and try to make suggestions as far as, cleaning up the text or making the prose a little bit more readable, or streamlining it a little bit more. Every little bit helps. One other thing that a lot of authors misunderstand or just have a misconception of is that a lot of traditional publishers nowadays don't really do a lot of the edits anymore. They're expecting the authors themselves to shoulder some of that weight themselves. So a lot of traditional publishers these days, unless you're talking about one of the big 5 publishers, a lot of the traditional publishers these days expect the author to have some of the other editing done, and they leave only the final proofread to the in-house editor.
Your last comment makes sense as to, why I read certain books and I'm like, why didn't the editor cut this? And yeah, I'm hearing the same thing from other editors as well, that they are seeing that some of the publishing houses aren't using their own editors as much. So,
Right.
Yuchi?
So yeah, I think a lot of great points have been brought up, and as to whether or not one should hire an editor, a developmental editor, I think it's a very personal choice, and definitely one has to take into consideration what their budget is, because everyone's mentioned, it can be really expensive. Could be $1,000 up or several $1,000s, and not everyone may have those funds. But I think everybody's situation is different. So I would say, yes, it's not necessary. You can very well get an agent and publishing deal without having hired an editor. But yeah, as Kristin says, it can help. I do want to point out, it's definitely not guaranteed that you will land an agent, even if you hire an editor. So I think it's just something to keep in mind when having expectations. So I was really lucky that I didn't have to pay because of the mentorship contest. But when I look at it, so we had an agent showcase after the contest, and the YA book that went through the full 3 months of developmental editing actually did not land me my current agent. So a few months later, so I started querying my other manuscript, which never went through an editor. And then a few months ago, that was the one that got me my current agent. So I think it just speaks to you don't need to have hired an editor to get to the next stage. However, even though that YA wasn't the book that got me my agent, that whole process of working with my editor was still just so helpful, because it added a bunch of skills to my toolkit. So I think viewing it in that sense, not oh, this is a means to an end, if I hire this editor, that will greatly increase my chances of getting an agent or something. I don't necessarily think that's the best way to go about it, and instead viewing it as an educational experience might be a really beneficial mindset, because you can read a bunch of craft books and things like that, or take courses, but that really individualized one-on-one experience with someone who is coaching you through the process, that is very, very valuable, I think. And it's almost like taking a course or cramming in a bunch of craft books into, that time that you spend with that editor working together. So yes, it's not necessary to get one, but there is educational value in it.
Well, some editors do provide like sample editing, like free sample editing, but not all. So, Michael, what would be your tips for finding out if an editor would be a good fit for them? If you don't see a sample, how do you know if they're a good editor?
Well, if I wanted to get a sample and I wouldn't give me one, I wouldn't use them. It's rather simple. When I first started out, when I was looking for self-publishing editors, first thing I did was I would have like 3 pages, and I would send it out to a large variety of editors of varying levels of price, and I would ask them to edit as much or as little as they wanted to, and then based off of that example and that type of writing, how much would they charge for a 100,000 page book? And then they would come back with their changes and I could compare them. And literally my wife would actually do a spreadsheet and she would have the price, level, the amount of errors that got, and I would put errors in specifically to see what and they would find other ones that I didn't put in that I had accidentally put in. So you could actually do a spreadsheet and find out exactly which one would fit. But in my opinion, that's really kind of irrelevant. What I found over the years is that it's far more important to find an editor that matches your writing style. And that's not something you get unless you're working with them. I have had people who I will go through my novel and I will write words and sentences, taking out all the unnecessary words that are in there. And then now have an editor come behind me and put them all back. And that can be very frustrating. So when you do find someone, because some editors go overboard, they literally want to rewrite your book. Other editors will just barely touch it. They won't, they'll just look for, are all the periods in? So you want to find someone who you're comfortable with that's going to match your writing style, someone who's going to be giving you the right amount of additional information. And, like if you have a problem with, passive sentences, they're going to find that. Or you just need someone to literally do proofreading, or you need someone who really will help you and say, this sentence could be completely redone and this paragraph is kind of sloppy and you have this in the wrong order. That kind of editing is something that you have to, as a reader or as a writer, you have to know what you're looking for. And when I'm writing, I tend to like someone who will give me a little bit of a push, but I also don't want them rewriting my stuff because that just makes it ridiculous and I'm wasting my time with them. So you do have to find the right person who matches your writing style, and they have to know how you're writing. They have to know the intent of your writing, and they have to know your voice, because you don't want them messing with that. And if you can find that, that's gold. And that's better than having someone who gives you a sample, because if they can actually prove to you that they understand what you're trying to do and they're going to augment it rather than just kind of get rid of the errors, that's what you want.
All right, Kristin?
I mean, Michael said it great. So when to kind of give a perspective from the other side of the fence as the editor, so I do offer free sample edits. And when I ask the potential client, the author, to send me an excerpt of their manuscript so I can do a sample edit on it, I ask them to send me 1,000 words, a mixture of dialogue and narration, something in the middle of the book that hasn't been over edited and that is representative of your writing. And then I edit it. But yeah, like Michael said, it's not just about the editing style. It's about, do you and the editor get along? Do you see eye to eye? Do you have similar communication styles so that it's easy for you two to understand each other? If you and your editor disagree on something, what's the next step? Does your editor just say, okay, well, never mind then, and walk away? Or does your editor try to explain, okay, no, this is why this change needs to be made? So these are all different factors that you need to keep in mind when you are shopping for an editor. Yeah, a sample edit is absolutely great. And it's definitely a necessary step to make sure that the editor knows what she's talking about, and that her editing style matches your writing style. But equally as important is that you and your editor are a team. So you need to make sure that you'll make a good team.
Yuchi?
Yeah, I agree that doing sample pages is really helpful for gauging fit, because ultimately finding the right fit is really important. You want an editor who understands your vision and wants to help bring it to life on the page and help you bolster it instead of like changing your vision. And I would say, like, in addition to the sample pages, a lot of editors offer like consultation calls too, like a free consultation call. So I highly recommend doing that, because, you know, with communication being really important in any partnership, you want to make sure, in addition to what's on the page, that, you know, if you have questions, how your editor communicates is really important. And during that call, you can also gauge fit to see if this would be the best partnership.
Sarah?
Yeah, matching style is huge. I agree. I actually took some notes before this, and that's the thing that I wrote down, is make sure their style meshes with yours. You can also talk to previous clients too, reach out to some previous clients. I found the writing community to be really welcoming when it comes to that. I've had people reach out to me about my publisher before, and I'm more than willing to talk to them about anything, any questions they have. And I would assume people would be the same way about their editors. But I've worked with editors that don't get me. And I've worked with ones that it's just immediate, just, oh my God, you knew exactly where I was going with this. And it's a huge difference. I think knowing where your weaknesses are when you're looking for somebody, whether it be a critique partner or an alpha or beta reader or an editor, is huge, because I want to, I know that when I write, I am really economical with my words, and sometimes my sentences need to be unpacked some, and having somebody say, right there, you just said like 20 ideas in one line, and you know, it's 3 words long. Like, what are you doing? That's helpful for me. So I want to find somebody who's comfortable going through and telling me where things don't hit the way that I thought that they did. I know that's my weakness. So I don't want someone to go through and just, you know, run word grammatical changes and then write it all on my manuscript, because I've had that happen too. And I also know that I need to have somebody who's okay with me putting pictures of naked mole rats in my comments. So.
All right, Nicole.
I love that. Well, I think I connect with everything that's been said so far. I think that the part of having someone who matches your voice and your writing style, both things at the same time, are so beneficial and so necessary. I think that's something that Jushi brought up. Sorry if I said your name wrong, but that part of having consultation calls and actually sitting with them, talking to them, seeing how you make a conversation happen, it can really make or break a relationship like you would with your own partner. So that's the thing you want. You want a person you will have an open channel for communication when needed. Because, like Sarah was saying, I have a similar issue, like I explained, but with my description. So I'm great with narrative and I can do some really great dialogues. But then when I'm describing something, maybe I think I did. And for me, that's enough. People don't see things in their heads, but people do. And I need to be mindful about that. So I needed that editor that would be okay with knowing that I had that issue and just like give me a slap whenever I do it and tell me, hey, you need to work on this part because it's really good, but I'm not seeing it as you might think I am. So that part of having someone who also is there to challenge you and tell you, I know you can do this better. I know that you can strive for something else in this chapter. It really makes a difference with your writing. So I would say learn as much as you can from the person you are wanting to connect to as an editor and wanting to hire. As we've said, try the community, the writing community, ask questions from people who have worked with that person, see their social media, see their business pages, and try to actually meet the person you're going to be writing with, not just the professional.
Right. Those are good. Yeah, I really liked the fact that, Michael and Nicole kind of brought up the fact that, an editor really needs to make sure that they capture the author's voice, that they're not trying to say, well, I would say it like this type of thing. It's not their book, it's the author's book. So that I'm really glad y'all brought that out. Also, and Kristin, I'd love to hear what you have to say. I'm kind of ad-libbing here and adding some questions in that I didn't already have, um, but along with the writers trying to find the editor that works with them, it also kind of works the opposite direction too, where some editors are looking and saying, if I'm really being honest with you, I'm going to tell you we're not a good fit ahead of time, so no one's time is wasted.
Yeah, yeah. I've had to do that before, and it really sucks. It really does. Because I'm an editor, and I was built to edit people's books, and there's nothing more that there's nothing more that I want to do than edit your book. But in some circumstances, it could be the style of writing, it could be the genre, it could be different plot elements that are in the book. But sometimes editors and authors just, they don't fit.
Yeah.
But there are thousands of editors out there. So just because you haven't found the author that's right for you right away doesn't mean that just because you haven't found the editor that's right for you. See, I need to edit myself.
That's okay.
It doesn't mean that the editor isn't out there. So yeah, that's just something to keep in mind. Don't settle. Don't settle.
Good. Another one for you, Michael. Let's start with you. What are questions a writer should be able to answer when working with an editor?
It's funny. I brought this up earlier. The only thing I can think of is what style guide you want to use. Other than that, I can't think of anything else that a editor would be asking me, except maybe they would want to ask, to what level or to what degree I want it edited. I mean, some people would say, do you want me to structural edit? Do you want me to really tear this apart and try to do it the way I want to do it? Or do you want me to just give a light pass? And I know that in some of the bigger publishers, they can kind of do that with their publishers, with their editors, because I've talked to them and they say, like, because of how this person writes or because of who they are, we want you to do a very light pass on it. We don't make too many changes because you're going to offend that person. But other than that, what style guide do you want to use? And I mean, because that does make quite a bit of difference. And of course, I suspect most writers aren't even aware that there is such a thing as style guides. And without that, it does make it a little bit hard for a editor to try to explain why you are using the Oxford comma versus the not, and all these other little weird things like, well, I don't understand, because even like how you break up, dialogue with an action tag in the middle is like different things are just controlled by this arbitrary force in the world. And you can look at a published book and like, but they used it here. Like, well, yeah, but they're using a different style guide. So you have to figure out which one you're going to use. And either of that would match with whatever publishing houses you're hoping to present to, which would probably be in benefit. Or if you're self-publishing, then basically what you're comfortable with or what you want to see.
Kristin?
Yeah, so Michael was saying that, talking about style guides, and that's a really good question. One thing to keep in mind is that the most common style guide for novels is the CMOS, which is the Chicago Manual of Style. Pretty much every single editor works with the CMOS. I'm part of a network of 8,000 editors, I believe, and we all use Chicago Manual of Style. That's something to keep in mind. Like Michael was saying, most authors aren't even aware that there is a style guide because there are so many gray areas in editing. There are so many things that, you know, not necessarily black or white or right or wrong. There are a lot of areas that in editing that can come down to a subjective opinion. So the style guide really helps clarify a lot of the potential issues that might come up in a book when editing a book. One thing also to keep in mind is that publishing houses, yes, a lot of publishing houses will have their own style guide. It's usually an offshoot of the Chicago Manual of Style, but yeah. So anyway, so the style guide is very important. Also important when finding your editor, who is your target audience? What is your book's genre? These are the questions that will help you find the editor that is right for your book. There are, like I said, there are a lot of editors out there. There are a lot. And editors, I mean, editors of every range have different specialties, different genres that they work in. So you need to be able to identify who your book's target audience is, what your book's genre is, in order to find the editor that works in that genre. You also want to be able to answer the question, what is the overall message or purpose of your book? There have been lots of times when I have been editing an author's book and it's like, what is going on here? Like the plot is not clear, the overall storyline is not clear. And I mean, there have been actual times when I have asked the author, what's the purpose of this plot point? What is going on here? And they can't answer that question. So knowing your book, knowing your story intimately is a very important part of not only creating a quality book, but also giving your editor the tools they need to help you craft that quality book.
Yuchi?
I think a good question writers might want to be able to answer when working with an editor is, what is the heart of their book? You know, and what are they trying to achieve with this story? Because I think for the writer to be able to know that and to be able to answer that, that'll help both themselves and the editor be able to work better together to achieve you know, the message that they want the book to have. So I would say that's probably a key question that's good to brainstorm and think through when working with an editor.
Sarah?
I don't have a lot to add here because I haven't really had any questions asked of me by my editors. I think the only thing that I could think of other than what's already been said is how you're comfortable getting those edits, but you don't usually have a choice as the author. They come the way they come. I'm jealous of everybody who says they got an edit letter because I never did. I just got track changes and comments, and that's all I've gotten from every editor I've worked with. And I think every author is sitting there going, but what did you think of the book? But I mean, I guess that's just the little needy kid inside of me. But yeah, that's about it. Other than that, the only kind of questions I've ever gotten from editors are mostly pertaining to world building because I write science fiction fantasy. And like I said, I tend to write very tight sentences. And there's sometimes where apparently I thought I said a thing that I didn't very clearly. And I'm like, wait, you didn't understand the entire complex nature of the communication between humanity and my fae over here from this, one paragraph in the middle of chapter 15? No, okay. So I think some of those world building questions do come up, but as far as actual delivery of notes, I do think that editors tend to vary on how they are most comfortable making the notes and the suggestions.
I'd like to step in here for a second because she brought up a point is you want to know whether they were enjoying your book, and they never say that whether they liked it. There's an easy way to tell if an editor is enjoying your book. If you get to an exciting part and there's no edits.
Okay.
That has happened many times. It's like, okay, so the rest of my book was absolute crap, but when you get to this exciting, suddenly it's perfect. There's never an edit. I'm like, I have a feeling they were really engrossed in the story, and they just kind of skipped and like, oh, it was fine.
That's because they were too engrossed in it that they forgot they were supposed to be editing it.
Yeah.
It's happened. Nicole, what about you?
Yeah, I think we've all brought some really great points. And I think most of the things you will have to answer, like we've said, are things that are just why this book is being brought in a nutshell. So especially if you're going for nonfiction, I know that a lot of us just like to go to fiction, but for me, that this was my first nonfiction book, I had to answer the question, what is different about your perspective from this topic that probably other people have reading about? Because what hasn't been reading about, right? So I think this is also a great thing to bring to the fiction genre, because you want to know what you're bringing. And I think that if an editor can have this perspective of what you want to be known for in this book, or what you want to bring to the table, to this immense conversation of whatever it is, the topic or genre you're going for, it really helps build that good editing relationship, because they will be able to call up on you when you are not being consistent with that perspective or with that idea that you might have in your heart and in your mind, and you just forgot about it for those, I don't know, 100 pages. So I think that that's something that really helped my relationship with my own editor. She knows my perspective, she knows what I'm going for, and whenever I stray from that because I was tired, or that day I just wanted to get the words in the paper, she'll be able to tell me, hey, we were going for this, what happened? I'm like, yeah, you're right, I was just a little lazy that day. So I'll go back to writing. So I think that for me has been one of the biggest, greatest answers that I was able to give an editor, and she has it in her mind whenever she's reading my book, and she looks for that. So that has been great.
Well, all of the legalese jargon that's in contracts can be pretty intimidating to some writers. Kristin, which clauses should a writer expect or watch out for in an editing contract?
Okay, so I actually printed out one of my contracts to share. So on this, we have details about the agreement, the payment, the delivery, confidentiality and copyright. That's a really important one. So basically, what the contract is going to cover is what's on my contract: word count, project start and end dates, and what services will be done. Those are the main things that will be on the contract with an editor. As far as payment, most editors will ask for a portion of the project fee upfront. Usually happens before they will reserve a spot on their schedule for you. So just be ready for that. The confidentiality and copyright clause is probably one of the most important things on the contract. If you're working with a professional, credible editor, you don't have to worry about them stealing your work. It just doesn't happen. But it's always a good idea to ensure the editor includes this clause in their contract. Mine states the editor is also bound by contract to adhere to all copyright laws and will not reproduce, redistribute, or otherwise claim the client's work as her own. So, so yeah, that's all of this small, teeny tiny print. It's important. So make sure that make sure that you fully read over the contract before you enter into this legal agreement with an editor. And yeah, making sure that the details are clear, the word count, what services will be done, and then that confidentiality and copyright clause.
Yuchi?
I didn't have to sign a contract for mine, so I might not have too much to add here. But I guess what I would say is if after reading over the contract, you have questions, like I think definitely schedule a follow-up call to go over those questions. And also if the contract doesn't address some of the things that you have questions or concerns about, to talk about that, because contracts can be negotiated and changed. So for example, if the contract doesn't say anything about does the editor charge for like follow-up phone calls or something, because sometimes within the time frame that you set out, you may think you're done, but then later on you might find, oh wait, actually, I kind of want to revise more, or I thought of things that I didn't while we were working together. Then how are those moments handled? Like, so for follow-up calls and follow-up revisions, if they come up, are they priced differently? How does the editor approach those? So I think just thinking through these questions and talking about them during a call would be a good idea.
Sarah?
Okay, I haven't hired an editor for anything other than my query letter, which I only did because I saw that Diana Foe was taking freelance work between gigs at one point, and I was like, oh, yes, please. So I don't really have much to add to that, other than if you don't understand something, there are resources out there available to you. Writer Beware is amazing. Victoria Strauss will actually respond to you if you email her and say, help, because they're out there trying to protect writers. So if you just make sure you understand what you're signing before you sign it. That's all I got for you.
Nicole?
So I think that besides what might seem obvious, like what is going to be the scope of the work, is it just an amount of words that they're going to be covering? Is it manuscript and whatever comes after? And timeline is really important, just to know how long they will be working on your project and your dates that you have to give to them. I think that like Kristin was saying at the start, there's a lot of other things like non-disclosure agreements and copyright that must be in that contract. But since you have all that legal stuff going in there, you want to make sure that you have a part where you can see the rules regarding breach. So if you or your editor breach the contract, what would happen then? Would you have to cover the legal fees? Would you just stop working in the project? You want to know what will happen if that contract basically goes void. And I think that's a really great thing to have in any type of contract. And just remember that these things, we don't want to think that they will happen, but they can. And you want to be the best informed you can be to know what steps you're going to be having to take once that horrible thing that nobody wants to think about happens. So I think that's a really important part of any contract.
Michael?
Yeah, I've hired several editors, but I've never had a contract with one. So I in fact, when I heard this question, I was like, huh? I have had a writer's agreement, a letter of agreement, which essentially was them giving me the courtesy of telling me when they plan on starting and how they expect to get their payment and when they would expect to get it. And it's basically just getting us on the same page. We understand what's going to happen, but there was no signing of it. There was no contract involved in that. I mean, I find it a little strange that someone would be going to the extreme of doing a contract for something of editing, because it's certainly, with me, it's a really simple process. I mean, I give them the book, they give it back. Occasionally they might email me with a question or something, but it's not much more beyond that. It's not even, like the level of an agent. And I've had agents that I don't have contracts with. But so, I mean, the only people I ever really have contracts with are major publishers. And those are scary things, because contracts can get really nasty when you're with people who do it for a living. And if you're not really careful about what you're doing, you can get yourself in trouble very quickly. And I prefer not to work with a contract for that reason, because they have a tendency, because unless you're writing the contract and you're presenting it to the editor, then you're okay, because you know what's in there and you wrote it yourself. But if an editor is giving me a contract, I probably won't work with them.
Okay. What kind of control does a writer have on accepting and rejecting the edits? Does the intended publishing method impact this? Nicole, help us out here.
I think that through the conversation, we've actually been able to say, what control do you have? And most times is basically all of it. You can say, I'm not going to take those suggestions. Like Michael was saying, are these suggestions or actual things that I have to do? So normally you have all of the control. I do invite all the authors to be really just open to the criticism and the suggestions that they're getting, because these are people that most times do want to help you. In my case, she's been helping me, so I know that she wants to help me. And whenever she has a comment, it's really good. Like, I read it, and since I'm coming from that perspective of this person wants to help me, they're reading my book and they want it to be the best way possible, I have a good vision of, I want to see this and I want to take her comments seriously. So in this book, there hasn't been a suggestion I think I've not taken, because it really has helped me get to the place I want to be. But I have the liberty to say, no, I'm not going to do that, and just get my manuscript done with whatever I wanted. And I do think this would be impacted by the type of publishing you would want. If you're self-publishing, obviously no one is going to tell you but yourself what you have or don't have to accept. But maybe if you're going to a major publishing agency, they might be a little more resistant to, since you are going to be representing them, they want you to represent their brand, right? So there are things that they want to see in their books and things that they might not. So I think that if you're someone who just wants to have full liberty of saying and full control, maybe ask that right ahead with the person you are going to be working with and the publishing agency you're going to be working with. And if they have that feedback for you, then, like Michael said, I'm just not going to work with them. And that's completely valid. So normally you have all the control, but know that if you're going with traditional publishing, some people might say, since you are going to be speaking for us, this is what we expect you to keep in mind.
Michael?
Let's see. I'm trying to remember the question now.
So that's okay. That's okay. Basically, it's, how much control do you have of accepting, rejecting edits? And you mentioned it a little bit earlier, but
right. It's essentially in the contract. When you sign the contract, it'll say how much control you have. And I was once with the largest independent publisher. And when I had the contract with them, it literally stated that we made changes to the contract and sent it back. And they said, well, in this form of the contract, Michael has complete control over the finished product. And I said, yeah. And they said, we've never had a contract that way. And I'm like, well, I've published through the two biggest publishers in the world, both Random House and Hachette, and I've never not had it that way. So why wouldn't you do that? So they had to change that if they were going to, and I ended up not going with them anyway. But the fact of the matter is that it's in there. And I don't see any reason why the author should not have final say over every single word. Now, there is a problem insofar as there might be something in the contract that states that the certain things are based off of when you have an accepted manuscript. And if there's a discrepancy or an argument between what they want and what you want, you may never get to the stage of accepted manuscript. And that can cause the book to hang into limbo because the copyright, or not the copyright, but the invokement of the contract can't be canceled because it was never completely fulfilled of, because they didn't take it out of print or anything like that because of the fact that you never actually got it that far. So you can get in this weird little limbo, but if it simply states that you have final say over everything that comes out, you're good, but you have to know it's in your contract. Now, if it's self-publishing, obviously it doesn't matter. When it's self-publishing, you have absolute control anyway.
Kristin?
Yeah, what Michael said as far as self-publishing, because most of my authors, oh my gosh, 99% of my authors end up going the self-publishing route. And self-publishing is really awesome because you as the author are in the driver's seat. That's something that I say a lot, so much that it's almost become a mantra for me. The author is in the driver's seat. So when I edit a book, I work in Microsoft Word using track changes. So every single one of my edits are highlighted in red, or striked out in red, or whatever. So every single one of my edits is visible, and actually you are able to go down each edit balloon, and accept or reject. Now, obviously, the editor is on your side. So the editor is trying to make your book the best it can be. But ultimately, it is up to the author. If the author doesn't agree with some of my edits, yeah, it might be it might be frustrating for me because I did a lot of work on that manuscript, but ultimately it's up to the author. It's the author's book. It's the author's name on the title page. So it's up to the author. The author's in the driver's seat. So yeah.
Okay, Yuchi?
Yeah, I think with any collaborative process, I think ultimately, yeah, it is the author's say, and I just encourage, if a discrepancy comes up between opinions, to just have a conversation about it. Because like Nicole mentioned, the editor is trying to help strengthen the manuscript. But if the visions don't align, then maybe have a conversation and see if there's a different way that can be utilized to achieve the effect, or to discuss what is the underlying issue, and is there a middle ground or some other way to kind of bridge the two visions or something like that. So I think, yeah, with any collaborative relationship, communication is key and really important. And I also encourage writers to kind of sit with the edits for a couple of days, because I think it can be easy to, when you first receive feedback, it's when you put a lot of work into your writing, and if you have to make big changes, sometimes there's a bit of reluctance there. So I think initial reaction may not always be the most accurate one, but if you take some time to maybe sleep on it and think about it, and then you come back to that feedback and look at it over again to see if it would actually be a value add, then you can maybe maybe then it can sink in a bit more and you might find that actually a lot of this does make sense. Or if you've had that time to think over it and the feedback still doesn't resonate with you, then, you know, maybe have a discussion and not make those changes.
Sarah?
In all my experiences, I had the final word. And most of the time, unless it was something very obvious, yes or no, like comma placement or something like that, most of the time I do end up taking that third route that Yuchi was talking about, where it's like, okay, there's a comment here, but the suggested way to fix it is not, that's not what my book is. I will find another way to, I trust my editors enough to know that, okay, there's a problem here, but most of the time I end up fixing it in a different way than what they recommended. I'd say probably, I maybe 75% of the time find another way to tackle that issue. And I do, but I wish I had learned before my debut, I wish I had learned the word STET, S-T-E-T, because I went down the comments the first time that I got my edits, and I went down and I wrote detailed explanations of every reason that I was not, anything that I did not accept. And it was the most time consuming, awful thing that I've ever had to do. And I will never do it again. But I also wanted her to know that I was not, you know, disrespecting her. I'm like, no, I see where you're going here, but this is why I'm not going to do that. And I went through and I cited style guides. It was tragic. Don't do that. But other than that, I always had final word, and I never really had any strong disagreements one way or the other. Either I went with something, I came up with my own way, or I told them, no, it's going to stay this way, and it never came back again. So.
Well, Kristin had talked about, you know, it's the author's name on the book. It's their picture on the back or in the cover or somewhere. You know, Yuchi had also mentioned that that it's whatever the editor does doesn't guarantee that you're going to get an agent or get published. And so I think, especially for self-publishing, it's the author taking all the risk. So therefore they should have the last say. You know, if the editor's saying, well, I'm guaranteeing you, if you make this change, you will get published, that would be completely different. You know, an author would be more apt to be like, okay, I'll do whatever you say, you know. But an editor can't guarantee that. So it is the author accepting the risk. You have to trust your gut. This is your story. You know it better than anybody else, including the editor. And also, you know, I've known writers and editors to not see eye to eye on some suggested changes. Yuchi, how do you resolve feedback disagreements with the editor?
I didn't have too many disagreements with mine because I thought most of the things that she pointed out made a lot of sense. There were probably like a couple of edits that maybe I wasn't fully on board with at first. So I think, again, going back to what I mentioned earlier, just having a conversation about it, because I want to understand where the editor is coming from. If they're making this feedback and it doesn't resonate with me, maybe it can be clarified further, like their thought process for why it would make the manuscript stronger. And then in that conversation, then I can talk about the reason why it maybe doesn't align with my vision, and on my side clarify what I'm trying to go for. And I think through that conversation, an agreement can usually be struck. So if during that conversation we find that there is like an issue in this section that needs to be addressed, but like, you know, Sarah also said earlier, maybe there's another way to do it, then we can talk about that. So I think like disagreements on stuff like in any situation is inevitable at some point. And I guess it also depends on how strong those disagreements are, because sometimes if it's like a small edit, then it's probably not a big deal and you might not even have to have a conversation about it. But if it's like a, you know, a big, say like structural change or something like that, that's a disagreement, then it's worth having that conversation. So yeah, I think just, you know, being tactful and like don't go at it being very defensive or being like, you don't know what you're talking about, you know, but just having a constructive, like productive conversation about the disagreement and trying to strive for an agreement.
Sarah?
I didn't have any major disagreements. And I do know that my publisher, I don't know if this is normal or not, but my publisher had said from the beginning that if you get to a point where you're just not seeing eye to eye with your editor, we will pair you up with somebody else. It might affect your release date, but they totally were behind me and all of that. I didn't ever get to that point. And like I said before, none of the disagreements that I had ever came back to me. So I just kind of made my comment as to why I wasn't going to do it. And that was the end of it. And after that pass was over, I never heard about it again. So I assume it was okay. The book came out. So yeah, so I think that different publishers, and especially at different levels, I haven't worked with one of the bigger publishers, and I assume that it's going to be a remarkably different process. I'm sure they're not going to say, oh yeah, you get a different editor. But yeah, so it never really got that far. I think if you're respectful and you're not, and the person who's leaving edits is also respectful, I don't think it gets to that point very frequently. But that could just be, I don't have a lot of experience yet. So I probably just haven't had it happen yet.
Nicole?
I had a similar experience to Sarah. In my case, my publisher said, if you're having problems, just let us know. If you think they're not getting your vision or whatever, we'll try to find someone that does. So I also had that support from publishing, I guess, but I still haven't had any big disagreements with any editors. I think that part of it is because, like Yushi was saying, we established some really good conversation routes and we were always very kind to each other. So wherever she was coming from, she always kept in mind that this is something that is really close to my heart and a project that I feel very strongly about. So she also shows her words wisely whenever she wanted to tell me something that she might think that I might be hurt by. But I think that that's something we have to keep in mind ourselves. So these are our babies. We feel very passionate about them. And sometimes we have to just let those comments simmer, let those suggestions sit there, and then come back and see them with the eyes of someone who wants their project to be as good as it can be to whoever is reading it, not just to you. So I think that conversation is so important, communication, just keeping that in perspective that you might have very strong feelings about what you're working with, and you should not project those feelings with your editor. They're just trying to help you. So yeah, maybe you're frustrated or it has been a really hard road, but they are just there to make this book the best it can be. So let's stay kind always.
Michael?
When I work with an editor, usually the process is they send me back a Word file with commented out changes. And when that happens, I usually simply don't implement the ones I don't want. Or I will comment and say, basically, no, I'm not doing this. Or if I do agree with it, basically, if what I read makes sense, if I think it's a good idea, I'll make a change. If it doesn't make sense, I simply don't make the change. There's no argument, there's no disagreements, we don't have discussions. However, there was one time when I had an editor who, like I said earlier, they were putting back all the words that I was taking out. and I was aware that this editor simply was not the right editor for me. And this was with Del Rey, Random House. And with them, I literally refused to work with that editor and said, I have another editor that I do work with, and I would like you to hire them. And they said, okay. So speaking to Sarah and her concept is, yeah, you can do that with the bigger ones. Now, I don't know, because I've had a few books published and they've done fairly well. Maybe that had an influence on it. But yeah, they were completely whatever. If that is a better editor for you, then go right ahead and do that. So I actually took a person who was not being utilized by the big publishers, and now she has a job with them because I basically asked for her to be my main editor. So yeah, you can do that, but no, I've never really had any instance in which I've ever had a debate with an editor. Now, the one person I will have a debate with is my wife, because she's my alpha reader and she gives me structural edits, and we have knocked down drag out battles where she will give me a comment, and I swear the neighbors are going to wonder who's going to be killing who. But in those instances, it's absolutely necessary. And she's sitting right here. You've seen her walk behind the camera. She's sitting right here. She's hearing me. And in those instances, it is important that when someone gives you bad feedback of your book, you hate them. You want to kill them because this is not what you want to hear. But it's true. There was one time when she gave me feedback and I said, I am absolutely not making that change. No way. Then the next day, when she was not there to see me or hear me, and I sat down in front of my desk all by myself where no one could see, I looked at it and I went, damn it, she's right. So I made the change. I did not tell her until she read the final proof. She said, wait a minute. She goes, this has been changed. You said this wasn't going to change. I'm like, that's the way it always was. What are you talking about? She said, I have old copies. You can't get away with that. So if you do make the change, they're going to find out. But no, that's the only time I ever had a discussion with that. But yes, it's absolutely true that if you wait and you let yourself reflect on it, it won't be as painful later. And if it makes sense, you make the change. And if it doesn't make sense, you don't make the change.
And now you said that Robin was right on a recording that will be on the internet forever.
Oh God, there's
She'll
many
keep
of
it.
those. It's not.
Yeah, Sarah.
I just want to say I'm pretty sure that I do not have the power to get anybody hired at Del Rey.
Not yet.
Yet. Okay.
All right, Kristin.
Okay, so feedback, disagreements with the editor. Well, hopefully that you make a good team with the editor that you chose. That's what I was talking about when I'm talking about the sample edit, and talking to the editor before you hire them is really important, that you can communicate and that you feel like they understand your goals and your vision and your writing. So hopefully you have that squared away before you enter into this agreement with them. But just know that when receiving feedback that you're not happy about, just know that the editor's on your side. Sometimes you have to kill your darlings. This is an unfortunate part of writing, is that sometimes what you think as the author, what you think is fabulous, just doesn't translate well on the page. And so when the editor is giving you that feedback, just remember they're on your side. And this is actually, I have like an entire paragraph at the very beginning of my edit letter for my manuscript critique service. So yeah, but ultimately how I handle feedback, disagreements with authors is, I understand at the bottom line, at the end of the day, it's the author's book. So if the author wants to reject one of my edits or one of my suggestions, even if it means reintroducing an error into the book, and that has happened, it's the author's book.
So, Sarah, what do you like most about working with an editor, and what do you like least?
So I worked on a short story with Robin Huss, and she just automatically clicked with what where I was going with it and what I was doing. I have a really kind of dark humor to everything I write, pretty much, and I'm always afraid that the editor is not gonna really wrap their head around it, or it's gonna be off-putting. Everything I do is a little weird. And she just automatically saw where I was going with it, saw what it was, and ran with it. And I wish that that wasn't the first short story I ever published, because it wasn't very good. And I would love to work with her again on something much better. I do have them. But that was just awesome, though, to see her take this vision of mine that I didn't know if it was coming through properly, and just point out areas where I could make it stronger and bring it home. And I loved that. Actually, another short story I worked on with, I forgot her name, I'm terrible. But anyway, she also got it. I love when they're on the same page and they follow my weirdness and are able to not only support it and bolster it, but also expand upon it a little bit. Be like, okay, no, bring it out here. Oh, you're almost there. You're almost there. But and the thing I dislike is that uncertainty at the beginning, where I'm going, oh God, they're gonna think I'm weird. Where I just don't know if the reader's the editor's gonna connect with it or not. That's anxiety inducing to me. And I don't have any control over that. So that's probably the crux of my anxiety.
Nicole?
I think that what I've liked the most is all the growth that I've had through working with editors. Like I said, they really have done a great job in telling me what I need to work with as an author, and I've done it, and I feel a lot stronger with my work. Also, that part of actually getting a vision to where I want it to be, especially with this book. I did not know where or how I was gonna get that idea across. And it was actually through our work together that it was able to come together. So I'm just grateful to have that type of connection with someone that allows me to grow and allows me to get a product out there that people will be able to connect with and will actually like. In terms of what I like the least, I have to agree with Sarah, is the anxiety. I do have a generalized anxiety disorder, so I mostly have anxiety through everything. And having someone reading my book, giving me comments, giving me feedback is so anxiety inducing, especially when I'm working with something as raw as nonfiction. It doesn't get any better with fiction, because then I go into satire and dark humor like Sarah, and it's like, oh my God, they're going to see this side of me. So I think there's always that anxiety of having someone reading something that's so personal to you. You're literally letting them into your mind. That's how I look at it every time I'm writing something. Someone is going to see how I think and how I write. That's basically how I am in here. So maybe that part, but when you start getting used to it and you start accepting that it's actually going to help you get to where you want to be as an author and just as a person, it gets a lot better. So we just have to get over that.
All right, Michael?
I guess the thing I like most about it is the education, because they know way more about grammar than I'll ever even begin to kind of conceive of. And I'll have believed that a certain word is used a certain way and discover, hey, that's not. In fact, that's not even the same word. And as always, when you come across those, you go, wow, yeah, that's neat. I'll have to write that down and remember it next time. And then I forget. And then I do the same thing again and I feel like an idiot. And that's also the worst thing, is after I work with an editor, I come along to realizing that I am not as smart as I thought I was. And that's probably the worst thing. But just wanted to make a comment here about, from Nicole, what she said is the fact that when you let people into your mind and how kind of potentially embarrassing that can be, that is actually the sign, I think, of a very good writer. And it's the fear of actually sharing something that's very true and real. And when you do that, that's the one thing in a book that a reader will react to because it's universal. If it's something you're making up, they don't really care. But if it's something that really happened and you feel embarrassed about sharing, a lot of people will react to that and go, oh my God, that's exactly how I feel. And that will be the part of the book that will probably resonate with more people. And I found that out fairly early on. And that was the one thing I did. One of the very first books I wrote, I had one scene in which I was like, I don't know if I even want to include this in the book because it's a little embarrassing, you know? And yet it was a very touching scene. I thought, well, I'm going to do it anyway. And no one ever said anything other than the fact that that was one of the favorite parts of the book. So whenever you feel that way, it's probably a good sign.
Right, Kristin?
Okay, so the question is, what do you like most about working with an editor? But I am the editor. So, I mean, what do I like most about working with myself? Well, I get to set my own schedule. So I'm going to kind of do a little twist on this question. So I'm going to answer the question, what do I, the editor, like most about working with the author? Hands down, it is seeing the transformation of their book. For a lot of authors, a lot of the authors that I work with, this is their first time hiring an editor. This is their first time writing a book. And so for me to be able to see the rawest version of that manuscript at the very beginning, and then work with the author to turn it into something that is published, the story changes, the writing changes. It changes in a way that it gets better. Okay, it improves. And so seeing the very first raw draft of that manuscript compared to the book as it's published, it's, I mean, it's amazing. It's very powerful. It's very moving. And that is by far the best experience that I could have as an editor.
Yuchi.
I really adored working with my editor. And so to shout her out, her name is Tiffany Grimes, and she runs Virgin Design and Editorial. She's a professional freelance editor, does developmental edits in a variety of categories and genres, but she was amazing to work with. I thought the process was just so fun because writing can be a really solitary process. So having that back and forth was just really, really fun for me. And I love collaboration. So I really enjoyed the collaborative piece. And she, with her feedback, she does both like the constructive criticism, but she also points out what works well. So like I loved reading her reactions in the comments, like the parts that made her cry, she'd point it out and be like, oh, or the parts that make her like laugh out loud. She'll have all of that in there too. So that was really, really fun to read and see like how she emotionally responded to the writing. And I loved that she believed in the story and really got it, and how her comments overall made it so much stronger. And I also loved how the things that she taught me are not specific to just that one manuscript. They're skills that I can apply to all future works. So yeah, like Michael mentioned the educational part of it, that is definitely hands down one of my favorite parts, because I just grew so much through working with her and picking her brain. And so I just think I'm a stronger writer now from that experience. So now when I approach like the current manuscript I'm working on, and like I am using a lot of the things that she taught me. So yeah, and I mean, the least favorite part, think like I really had any. So I don't know if this counts, but I guess like waiting on the edits. Like she was really, really fantastic with communication though. Like I was never left wondering like, when am I gonna get the next round of edits? Like we had, like a timeline in place, and she was really good if like both of us, if something were to change, like if I needed more time or she needed more time, like we would be really transparent about that. But yeah, I guess in the publishing industry in general, waiting and having to be patient is always like a thing. So yeah, I guess that's my answer.
Alrighty, well, you all have been great. Thank you for sharing your experiences with the Right Hive community. And before we go, we'd love for you to share any of your published works with the viewers. Any work in progresses that you're working on that you might want to share, whatever.
So I guess I will go straight to the work that's being published because all the other ones are from Puerto Rico magazine. So I don't think you guys have access to those. But I'm currently working on a book that will be published in August. So I'm so excited and terrified as well. It's titled Chronic, Daring to Go Beyond. And it's basically a collection of stories of women who struggle with or have struggled with chronic illness and disabilities. And my story is also in there. And it's basically just the journey each one of them took towards the success that they now have, and just showing you what things really worked for them and what things didn't. So it's been a really great project for myself. I've definitely grown a lot through it. I wasn't talking about my diagnosis even with my family for a lot of years, and I decided to do it through a book. So that's a little crazy, but I thought that it was time because I was hearing a lot of people say, "Oh, I cannot do my dream job or my dream goal because of this diagnosis they just told me." That's what I heard myself. So I wanted to let people that it's still possible to become whatever you want to become. I became an engineer with all of my diagnosis. So it's not that you cannot do it. It's not that you have to change whatever perspective you have of what you want to be or who you want to be. It's more about adapting to whatever life brings to you. And illness is just a very clear representation to roadblocks that you will find in your own journey. So here you have people who have adapted and who have dared to go beyond. So I hope people who just are in their own journey will want to join us in this process that we all went through. I'm really excited. I was able to interview 30 women who have been my heroines for the longest time, and I'm super excited for this thing to come out and people to benefit from it. So that's what I'm working on, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Good, thank you. Michael?
Most people who know me know that I've written the Rye Revelations, and then I wrote a prequel series of novels in the same world called Legends of the First Empire, and I'm presently writing a series of books in between the two. First one will be called Nolan. It'll be coming out, when's it coming out? August 3rd. And I also have a science fiction novel called Hollow World, which came out, I don't know, 4 years ago, I think. And that's it.
Thank you. Kristin?
Okay, so obviously I haven't written any books. You guys see that? Those are the books that I have edited. I've edited like somewhere in the realm of like 425, 430 right now. This is only like 125 right here. But I love the books that I edit. I'm sorry, I'm like really excited about it. Like I love every single one of the books that I edit. If you want to check them out, you can go to my website, kristincorrects.com. I have a testimonials and portfolio page that has all the books, not all the books, but a lot of the books that I have edited on there. So yeah.
Thank you. Yuchi?
I guess I'll share a bit about my work in progress. I'm currently working on revisions with my agent. So after those are done, we'll probably go on sub after that. But it's Chinese historical narrative nonfiction family saga. And so it retraces 300 years of Chinese history through my mother's Manchurian lineage. And so I cover 6 generations, or like about 7 of my own family. And each chapter revolves around an ancestor, a relative, as well as the historical time period it's set in. And it's narrative driven. And at the heart of the story is the ancient courtyard in Beijing that my mother grew up in. And this courtyard ties all of the stories together because every family member has a connection to it, whether they were born there, grew up there, or visited. And so the book reads in a "if these walls could talk" type of way. And it is very personal as well. As an Asian American, it is also about finding one's roots. So like when I was younger, I had no idea I was Manchurian. I thought, I was 100% Han Chinese. And it wasn't until much later in my life that I started digging and uncovered this like rich lineage that I just had no idea about. So it's also like about that personal journey of discovering those roots too.
What you can get right now is Double Crossing the Bridge. It is a comedic fantasy about a group of grog-chugging trolls who pull a heist on the evil corporation, the Covered Bridge. It's for children the same way that Deadpool is, so not. I've also got an article in Dan Cobalt's Putting the Fact in Fantasy that releases in 2020, in spring 2020, from Writer's Digest Books. And then I've got short stories in both exclusive JordanCon anthologies, which you can only get at JordanCon. And also, the editor's name that I worked with is Marath Walther. She's also a writer. But in fairness to me, that book has not come out yet. So that's why I forgot, not because she isn't fabulous. I'm really excited about that story. It's very Monty Python-esque. That's a word now, right? Okay, sorry. And you can find me on Twitter at Sarah J. Sover, or pretty much anywhere by that handle.
All right. Well, I really appreciate all of your time, and I think that's a wrap.